This is Judiciary Today, the TV show that brings you in-depth review and analysis of judiciary issues that affect you. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. 2014 is a historic year for Nigeria. It marks 10 decades after the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorates, 100 years of existence, 54 years of independence, and now it's 15 years of uninterrupted civilian rule. How has the judiciary fared so far? I'm here at the office of a veteran, a professor of law and a senior advocate of Nigeria to find out. Join me for details shortly after this break. My host on this episode of the show is Professor Itse Sagay. He is a senior advocate of Nigeria and a professor of law. Thank you very much, sir, for finding time to join us.
You're welcome.
How would you describe the performance of the judiciary as an arm of government relative to other arms in the past 15 years of civilian rule in Nigeria?
That's quite a difficult question because there hasn't been any real consistency. Not only that, and performances also vary with the level of the judiciary you are talking about. I think the levels that have performed best, in my view, is probably the Supreme Court. It has handed down some landmark judgments. If you remember what we call the Article cases against Obasanjo, Obasanjo tried to disqualify him from participating in the presidential election, when he even tried to remove him from office as vice president because he crossed from PDP to, I think it's ACN at that time. And quite a number of serious, of course, when they also found him liable in the so-called trial of some sort by administrative officers in order to disqualify him from from participating in the election. So the Supreme Court did very well. And of course, we had the very, very extraordinary judgment in Amechi's case, which introduced the principle that the party is really the main body that is participating in an election, and that you cannot contest an election and be declared a winner if in fact you lost the nomination. And the person who was nominated but not forwarded for the election will still be legally the person recognized by law. That was a very revolutionary judgment, and really what he tried to do is to curb impunity at the party level. So the Supreme Court did very well. The Court of Appeal had some good judgments. The last in the whole set was the High Court level. It's always a little bit unfair to conclude too much and make sweeping statements like this, but if I'm forced to make it, that's what I would say. And I think the problem at the High Court level particularly arose in election cases where we had tribunals made up of High Court judges, where so numerous judgments were given which had no relationship to the justice of the case or even the evidence which was available in the case. So, and then some of these judges at the High Court level were too subservient to the executive authority. And then, of course, the issue of corruption. That is where it was most manifest, although it was not exclusively so. I know it really ascended all ramifications of the judiciary, whether from top to bottom, let me just put it that way, when it came to corruption arising from election petitions, because those, particularly governors whose elections were being challenged, really had a lot of money to dangle, which those who got them could retire on and let even their grandchildren continue to inherit in generations to come. So there was that problem, but that is my own scoring. I think Supreme Court came out best, but I wouldn't think his own performance was stellar. But it was better than the others.
The idea of free, fair, and credible elections in the country is still far from being a reality.
Yes.
And many are of the opinion that the judiciary as an arm of government has a major role to play in bringing electoral offenders to book. That brings us to the question of how independent the Nigerian judiciary is.
Yes, the Nigerian judiciary is very independent. The provisions of the Constitution guarantee the security of tenure of a judge. To remove a judge is not an easy thing at all. You know, the recommendation for removal has to go up to the NJC. A governor, for example, cannot remove a state judge. Neither can the president remove a judge of the Federal High Court or Court of Appeal or even Supreme Court. He cannot remove them. He can recommend. And it's only when the NJC approves, after a thorough investigation, that they can be removed by the executive authority. You saw the case of the former president of the Court of Appeal, Salami. You saw how it went. If the NJC had not suspended him, and that suspension also required confirmation of the president, it would never have been removed. You need a combination of both the executive and the judiciary, which is the NJC, for any judge to be removed. So it's not easy at all. And normally, where it's a case of executive persecution, the NJC will stand by the judge.
What is now responsible for the perceived dependence of the judiciary on the executive as it is now?
Well, I don't think there's a dependence. There's no dependence at all. What has happened is that a lot of judges have been influenced by, first, by money, and in some cases, by executive pressure, those who do not have moral fiber. And a lot have succumbed to the blandishments of money. And I must say, the sums involved are huge. Sums that will be sufficient for anybody for many lifetimes have been paid. At times, we're talking of millions of dollars in some cases. Some judges have not been able to resist this, and this is at all levels, although the worst cases occurred at the High Court, and all those judges, or some of them, were removed. There are cases in the High Court and, of course, the Supreme Court. The higher they go, the more difficult it is for anything to be done about them. But I'm sure that in time, with the new Chief Justice we have, there are no sacred cows as far as she's concerned, from what I've seen so far. And I think her presence, her determination would be a restraint on this orientation, and those who are not restrained will probably suffer the consequences.
What about the idea of funding the judiciary?
The judiciary is very well funded. I have no doubt about that. First, judiciary is funded from the Federation account. And as you saw in the recent case that was decided, they are now a first-line charge. They just get their money directly and it goes to the NJC for disbursement. So that is there. In addition, the state judiciary is also funded by the state government. So they are getting money from both sides. If you look at a judge in Lagos State, is perhaps one of the most comfortable judges in the world. You are given accommodation, you are given the best in terms of transport. You have your own private car, which is usually a high quality SUV, which is for you. It's not an official car, it's your car. Arrangements are made for them to have their own personal accommodations in the best parts of town. So really, the judges have no excuse.
What then is responsible for the dwindling in faith of Nigerians in the judiciary or the justice process? Yes. Delayed injustice, yes. Accessibility to the poor, yes. And all of that. What's responsible for that?
Quite a number of things. The delay, for example. I give two reasons. Some judges are lazy. They are not productive. The work of a judge is a very intensive one. It requires a lot of hard work. You go to the court, you stay there till late afternoon, and then you retire to your chambers and work till evening and go home. Some do it, but some don't. That is one cause where they are not sufficiently productive, not sufficiently diligent. That is there. Secondly is the case of those who are influenced by this new set of senior advocates. When I say new set, I'm not saying they've just been made, but there's now I would say a class of senior advocates whose primary duty, primary objective is to drag cases on. They are usually briefed by people accused of corruption, stealing huge sums of money. I mean, we're talking of billions and billions, and perhaps if we're talking of in dollars, millions of dollars. They're usually engaged by people in that situation. All these corruption cases in the country, they're the ones who are usually briefed. Now, the persons who are being charged have no defense. So, because they have no defense, they do not allow the case to be heard on its merits. And therefore, the mandate of the senior advocate is to drag out this case at a preliminary stage which will never come to an end. So, for example, he enters a preliminary objection that the court has no jurisdiction, in a case in which there's obvious jurisdiction. And so the issue of jurisdiction is dragged on and on. All the other techniques are used, not coming to court, asking for an adjournment, all those things, yes, but the main point is sticking to the issue of preliminary objection. Now, after you've dragged it on for 3 to 5 years, finally the judge says he has jurisdiction. They appeal on that point. They don't allow him to now go to the substantive court of appeal. It takes 3 to 5 years for you to be heard. The court of appeal says it has jurisdiction, that the court has jurisdiction. Senior advocate goes on to the Supreme Court, another 5 years. Now, by the time the Supreme Court finally holds that the courts have jurisdiction, that they should go back now to the High Court for the case to be heard. The investigation officer has died, or he has been transferred, or he has been retired, or he is not available. The file itself might have been tampered with. Even if not tampered with, the enthusiasm of the Ministry of Justice has gone down because the case is almost no longer a live case. People who have direct memory of what has happened are reduced. So what I would call prosecution fatigue now comes in, and gradually the case dies a natural death. Prosecuted person goes away with his loot. The senior advocate goes away with his lifetime fee. And the game goes on, and it's all over the place. Just think of any ex-governor, ex-senator, ex-anything, any powerful person in the country now who is charged with corruption has at his beck and call a senior advocate who is specialized in dragging on cases until everybody dies.
So what do you think
it's a new profession within the legal profession.
What do you think have been done to bring that to an end?
I have suggested so many times. And what I notice about Nigeria is that anybody who suggests anything that is sane, that is right, that is correct, that is honest, that has integrity, is treated like someone who is crying in the wilderness. Is treated like someone crying in the wilderness. Nobody listens, the authorities don't care. I have suggested again and again and again, it's a simple measure. All you need to do is to state that in all matters of crime, not only even corruption and loan or stealing, in all matters of crime, any preliminary objection must be taken with the substantive matter together. Simple. But I think because there's a conspiracy, because those who are in authority themselves are potentially, if not already, guilty of crimes, they do not want this problem to be solved. All you need to do, you take both matters together. So, when you argue that the court has no jurisdiction, it's okay, yes, go on, argue, adopt your brief on it. Good, I've heard you. Now go to the substantive matter. Let's hear your defense on the criminal charges.
Okay.
The court hears that too. Then gives judgment on both on the same day. So once that judgment is given and you are moving to the Court of Appeal, that's the end. You don't come back to the High Court again. So simple.
Another question that arises in our 15 years of democracy as a nation is the question of how justiciable some of our laws and judgments are. For instance, there were two people who were charged for stealing a phone that belonged to an executive governor in Southwest. And one was jailed for 7 years and the other 10 years. There's another situation of someone who stole billions of pension fund and was given just 2 years imprisonment, or rather to pay just a few percentage of the money he looted away. What is wrong?
Absolutely. Because the man who stole the phone is a nobody, is a non-entity. The man who is looting the treasury and wrecking the economy is a big man, is a politician. They are the owners of the country. So they are taking what belongs to them in a country where the average person earns less than $1 a day. So that is it. I mean, here we are all sitting. You have corruption, you have stealing, but you also have legal stealing, as we have in Akwa Ibom now, where the governor is going to, on retirement, will get 100 million a year for his medical treatment. We'll get over 200 million on pension. We'll get a house built for him. We'll have a car every 3 or 4 years. We'll be giving a driver, giving a cook, steward, gardener, everything. In other words, he's going to be living still as a governor, in fact, much richer than a governor after he has retired. The point I'm making is that the powerful and the rich have turned all the resources of this country to their own service, and have ignored the millions and millions of ordinary people.
Are we talking about the problem of the systems or something wrong with the law? For instance, the scenario I gave to you earlier.
Yes.
Is it a challenge of the laws of the land, or the system, or the people in charge of the judiciary?
It's not the laws. The laws are there. The laws are there, but the laws are unenforceable against the powerful and the influential. It's a question of enforcement. Laws are not being enforced. Or in cases where they could be improved, as I suggested, they are not being improved. If you look at every country, virtually every country where the black man is in power, it's the same story. Virtually, it's not in all. There are some exceptions now. We are seeing Ghana emerging from the thick forest, emerging from the Stone Age. Take 3 or 4. But if you look at all the others, the black man in power ensures that all the resources of the country are turned towards serving himself rather than serving the people, serving the public.
Are we looking at a hopeless situation in Nigeria? Are you saying there's no solution to this particular challenge?
Honestly, particularly at the federal level, if this set of people somehow are not replaced by a different breed, there will never be any change.
This different breeds are they necessarily younger generation?
It doesn't follow at all. Some of the younger ones are the worst. If you look at many of the cases now, the cases are arising out of subsidy, scam and so on. There are lots of young ones involved. You see, the orientation of the average Nigerian now is how to make money at the speed of light. Nobody matters, nothing matters. And this is the general problem of this country. You hear of people doing rituals, killing people for money, kidnapping for money, everything for money. And the politicians, of course, have access to the money, and they are doing exactly the same thing. I was a teenager, but an enlightened one in upper secondary school, when Awolowo, Sardauna, Zik and so on were in power. Those people had no personal love for material things for themselves. If you go and look do a documentary on these people, you will see that they don't belong to the Nigeria of today. They are strangers. Those people, all the pleasure they got out of power was being allowed to serve. That's all. Simple people. Even if you see their dressing, the houses they lived in, many of them lived at home. Awolowo lived in his house at Okebola. They did not have personal love or value for material things. It is this post-military breed. When I say post-military, after the coup in 1966, since then, things suddenly changed. As if we have some planet sent in a different set of human beings to take over. Now, it's possible. It could be that we were invaded without knowing, and strange elements were injected into Nigeria.
Let's talk about political assassination in our democratic history. Many put it as close to 50 since independence. Now, one that is most baffling to me as a young person growing up in Nigeria is the case of a former Attorney General of the Federation who was murdered. And it looks as if the judiciary could not really, put a finger to who the culprit was. What do you think is wrong there?
You cannot blame the judiciary. The judiciary in Nigeria is not an investigative judiciary. It's a judiciary that in fact plays a reserved role. It listens to everybody else talks except the judge. He listens to you, yes, you finish your turn, yes, you give all your evidence, he's taking down notes, and based on all the information he gathers in points of facts, on points of law, he looks at it too, applies the law to the facts he has, and comes to a judgment. So the judiciary really is a recipient of information. Those who should be proactive, who should be, is the executive, the police, the government. Those are the people who failed in this case, not the judiciary.
Now let's talk about the appointment of judiciary officers. Some have said that the process is not open enough for the bar to appoint qualified personnel into these offices. How do you react to that?
I agree. A weak point, a weak aspect of this process of appointment is that the local bar, local lawyers are not sufficiently consulted.
Okay.
When one of their colleagues is being put up for appointment, there's insufficient consultation. So because of that, there's a tendency for the process to be influenced by those who are closest to the authorities, who is closest to the governor of the state, who is closest to the chief judge of the state. Those who are closest to them tend to influence it, because these are the people who make the recommendations. They of course, they sit on the committees that make the recommendations. There should be a process in which a name being proposed should be thrown out to the local bar and get all their comments. After getting their comments, you look at it. If it is negative, you investigate, and you find that the negativities are established, then you drop the person.
It's been 15 years of democracy. As we usher in the 16th year, what do you foresee as we begin to round up now in the judiciary of this forthcoming Nigeria?
It's always difficult to forecast what's going to happen. You can only talk about what is happening and what has happened. But I am encouraged by the present Chief Justice of Nigeria. I'm very, very encouraged by her demeanor, her orientation, her determination to stamp out misconduct. So it's not just corruption, general misconduct. For example, lack of productivity being another example, to the best of her ability. I think if she establishes precedent, and this is followed by her successors, then maybe in the next 15 years, we are going to see a great improvement. But at times, these things happen without any particular person bringing it about. It's just out of sheer luck. Most lawyers you talk to will tell you that in the 80s and 90s, we had the best judiciary in the world, so to speak, because of the people who suddenly congregated at the Supreme Court level. Esho, Oputa, Anyangolu, Obaseki, quite a number of others that are Bello, about 6 or 7, Namani. Just by sheer coincidence, some exceptional people, some stars, got together. And this was under a military regime. They started under a military regime and showed the military that an upright judiciary has no fear or cannot be controlled by anybody. And they gave judgment after judgment. Now, why they were important is this. They did it, as in all cases of the Supreme Court, on matters coming on appeal. So the lower courts got a message after some time, because they were misbehaving. Everything was pro-military. Everybody was afraid of soldiers. And you heard some judges in which they would say, you must blow a muted trumpet. Judiciary should blow a muted trumpet. Statements like that were made, where judges will say, this is a military decree and nobody can challenge it. Well, when he got to the Supreme Court, all these things were torn to pieces with solid, sound arguments backed by a philosophy that at the end of the day, justice had to be done.
Thank you very much for your time, sir.
You're welcome.
It's good to have you.
Right.
While the legislature is responsible for making laws and the executive responsible for implementation, the judiciary on the other side has that critical responsibility of interpreting laws in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. It is believed with a stronger and more independent judiciary, the mistakes of these two other arms of government can be spotted and corrected. That's it on the show this week. Thank you for watching. I do hope to see you again next week. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thanks for being there.
CORETV News, expanding your view.